Monster Rancher. Does anyone remember this anime from your childhood in the noughties, if you were born around then, and is now disappeared? Not talked about in the world of anime nostalgia, at least not in the West. Well, let me take you back on a trip, or even introduce you to it. Monster Rancher, the forgotten mainstream anime from the noughties, and why we don't reflect on it as fondly as other animes of the past. By the way, if you're a fan of anime, Japanese pop culture, or any Asian pop culture, then hit that subscribe button. A little introduction to the Monster Rancher concept. Like most animes at the time, it originally started out as a video game. The first Monster Rancher game was released in Japan in 1997 for the PlayStation 1 from Koei Tecmo, back then just called Tecmo. It was actually known as Monster Farm in Japan, and was later localized as Monster Rancher when it hit the western shores. I personally don't think Monster Farm was a bad name, but I can see how Monster Rancher is a better name for marketing. Monster Farm does sound like one of those old Facebook games where people would poke you so you can get more points. So, unsurprisingly, this game is like if Pokemon was to meet Harvest Moon, in that players took on a role of a monster owner/breeder that is tasked with raising and training monsters to compete in battles. What set this game apart was its unique monster generation system. This was pretty revolutionary for its time. Heck, I don't even know any games today that have this mechanism. Rather than encountering monsters in the game world, players used CDs or other discs in their own real world. The game system would read the disc to create a monster. The game has specific algorithms and patterns to create monsters from the disc. Different discs result in different monsters, adding an element of randomness and surprise to the process. Not all monsters were great to look at, but the idea and the excitement of not knowing what you may get was a major hook for game players. Man, I really wonder what the monster would look like for the Human Centipede DVD. Maybe not. The gameplay was pretty standard. It involved raising these monsters on a ranch, feeding them, training their skills, and eventually entering them into battles against other monsters. The monsters would then grow and evolve based on how they were cared for and trained by the player. Very similar to other JRPGs that require raising and battling critters. It was well received, praised for its innovative concept of using real-world discs to generate monsters, which encouraged players to explore their music and video collection to discover new creatures. Its success led to the development of sequels and spin-offs across various platforms, cementing the franchise's unique identity in the monster raising genre. As the game did reasonably well in terms of sales, it was time to jump on the TV show train and release an anime. The anime had a level of popularity, especially among the fans of the video game and younger audiences interested in monster-themed adventures. It achieved a decent following during its airing period from 1999 to 2001. Also, a quick fact, the anime came before the manga. For me, I came across Monster Rancher through a Saturday morning TV show called Live and Kicking, which was on the BBC, and the intro was a banger.
I was transported to a faraway land, into a world where monsters rule. I played the game like an ace. Now we're in this place to save the monsters from the evil moon.
The show revolved around a young boy named Genki, who loves playing video games and dreams of becoming a champion gamer. Oh Genki, would you love esports today? One day he received a mysterious CD that transports him to a world where monsters live and battle. Each monster belongs to a stone disc which had to be spun at a temple to be released. Genki and a girl named Holly who lived in this world have to find a disc that contains the Phoenix. The idea is that the Phoenix will take down the evil ruler of the land called Mu, who wasn't a cow, but actually a dragon. But anyway, this was mainly the plot in the anime. One thing I loved about Mu though is that in the beginning of the show, you hear characters being so afraid of him, and so when his final reveal came, I legitimately had a sense of dread and fear. So we follow Genki, Holly, and a few monsters they meet on the way as they try to find the Phoenix disc to take down Mu. It was an isekai anime before isekai anime was cool. Actually, is isekai anime cool now? I think fans are actually getting a bit fed up with those, aren't they? I mean, the whole one being transported and relived as a vending machine, I mean, that's just take the cake for me. The show was really fun. The character dynamics with each other were really good, although the characters themselves were a bit strange and a bit cliche. You had Mocchi, who was the baby of the group and would just say his name. Suezo, who was an eye, I guess, and cracked jokes. Hare, who was a leader, I suppose, but also driven by money, which made him make questionable choices. Tiger, who was actually a wolf and was serious and cold, but we all knew he had a heart. Golem, who was a big, gentle giant and would only fight when he needed to help his friends. Yep, now reflecting on it, there were a lot of tropes, but they were well put together cast for young people to enjoy. The action scenes also were really well drawn, and the story was really deep and understandable at the same time, especially when you find out about who Mu really is, and the pacing made it really easy to watch for a 9-year-old me. But today, I feel like I'm having some sort of Mandela effect. Once it stops showing, no one that I ask remembers it anymore. I feel like, was I the only one who experienced it? But no, there are Reddit threads, there are some websites dedicated to it, I found some videos on YouTube, but people just don't talk about it. Everyone still remembers the big four, as I like to call them: Pokemon, Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Dragon Ball Z. Heck, even Beyblade and card captors are still remembered. But nothing for Monster Rancher. Well, for me, there are a number of reasons that I've conjured up while researching on Monster Rancher on why it hasn't made the last long impact. So, let's jump straight into them. I'm going to start with a superficial reason: how the franchise looked visually. Monster Rancher definitely did not have the cute, bright art style that other popular animes had at the time. It had a slightly harsher tone in terms of art style of the world it was set in, as most of the anime was based in rocky areas and forests. But regardless, the show was definitely for kids. As mentioned, in regards to the games, the characters weren't the most visually appealing, and that was never rectified in my opinion when it came to the anime. For example, the two main mascots for the monsters were Suezo and Mocchi. I guess Suezo for the comedic relief and Mocchi was the adorable one, but in all honesty, I don't think they really resonated with kids. They certainly didn't with me. Sure, Mocchi was sort of cute when he can only say his own name like a Pokemon, but the design was not it. I mean, a platypus for a mascot? I mean, Psyduck is way cuter than that. When creating the video games, my assumption is that they didn't expect to push this into an anime and try to make it for a universal audience. It was a quirky game with a niche audience, although it was a bit too creative with their monster designs. So when this was chosen as a cute mascot and this as one of the intro characters, it was clear their choices were limited. The later characters were fine, such as Hare, Pixie and Tiger, but nothing that could be made into a merch item and sell by the buckets. As mentioned, the world was mostly forest or mountain, but the colours used had a much duller tone. Even when the characters came by a city, they would have a more medieval aesthetic, similar to that of Attack on Titan, and any use of technology had that cold steel visuals. This is respected. They don't need to be like Digimon or Pokemon and be over the top colourful. They stuck to their vision. But I think for the audience they were trying to reach and create longevity with, their visuals didn't look appealing enough, or made you wish you too could be in that world like you would in the other animes. It is superficial, but when you look at the visual appeal of the Pokemon world, the on-point branding on Dragon Ball Z, and even Digimon has striking monsters, Monster Rancher seemed to have missed the target in this aspect. Yeah, Dragon Ball Z isn't cute, but their choice of visuals were appealing and very aesthetically pleasing on the eyes, which also became a strong element of their brand. On the other hand, Monster Rancher didn't have strong brand colours and wasn't visually appealing. Monster Rancher wasn't unable to achieve that, and I do believe that's one of the reasons why kids at the time didn't gravitate towards Monster Rancher as much of the other animes were able to. While the anime was fine in terms of storytelling and we had the video games, the merch didn't transgress beyond this. It could be due to their mascot not being so marketable, but even Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't have a mascot, but it still was a very popular anime. Plus, it still has that very strong trading card community. Monster Rancher's merchandise for some reason wasn't well received, like Beyblades or trading cards. There were Monster Rancher trading cards, but it just didn't make any impact as the market was already very saturated. The cards never had much popularity in Japan, let alone in the rest of the world, and so fans couldn't really take their interest in Monster Rancher beyond the cartoons. As mentioned, the video game did fine and the sales of it prompted the anime. However, there were a few key issues with the video games. We're talking about a game released in the 90s, early noughties, and as mentioned, you needed your own disc to help generate new monsters. That was not cheap at the time. CDs cost quite a bit, way more than they do now. That's the only thing inflation hasn't affected. So it was a lot to ask for kids for consistently buy CDs who generate character back then, and so they couldn't really invest the time and care for the game. It wasn't a simple game either like the Pokemon games at the time, and so ultimately, it wasn't accessible for casual fans. Another aspect of the game is that unlike for example Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh games, the game didn't reflect what happened in anime. In the Pokemon anime, Ash is out collecting monsters, training them and battling them. You do the same thing in the games, except you are the Pokemon trainer. In Yu-Gi-Oh, you follow Yugi collecting cards and battling them to be the king of duels. In the games, you duel with your cards to become the king of duels. The games mirrored the anime. With Monster Rancher, it wasn't as a one-to-one. The anime is about a boy helping a whole new world, getting rid of their evil dragon boss and meeting monsters on the way. The game, on the other hand, was about you, the main character, on this farm raising monsters. It didn't have a world or a story within the game, hence it being more akin to Harvest Moon than other video games. This may have also put fans off the anime from getting into the games, as it didn't reflect what they were seeing in the anime. Maybe they thought the games would have more of an adventure with stories, but unfortunately it did not. So, although the games were good, but just difficult to get into or meet expectations, and the lack of other merchandise for fans to get into, it was hard for the Monster Rancher anime to gain a strong fan base. It did have a manga, but when it comes to manga in general, and this is not unique to Monster Rancher what I'm about to say, if a manga is spawned off from an anime or a video game, it doesn't seem to have the same commercial impact if it was the other way around, i.e. a manga inspiring an anime to be created. I think there's something deep about that, but I have noticed that the most popular anime are all stories that started off as a manga, and it seems like in this case with Monster Rancher, it still suffered the same fate. Finally, marketing. This is ultimately the key of why Monster Rancher is where it's at today. Monster Rancher didn't have a big corporation like Nintendo or Bandai at the time to help with the marketing push. So it can be forgiven, I suppose, for its lack of cult following, as there wasn't a huge pot of money available to get the show and the game in front of their target market. Sure, I managed to catch it on the BBC, which at the time was one of the biggest channels in the UK. But I feel this was just lucky that the BBC happened to pick it up. In other parts of the world, especially in the Western world, there was hardly any marketing for the show. And you can forget about any ads for the video games. Many fans commented that the show would be on the most random channel in their home country and shown at odd hours. And for the games, Tecmo did zero all in the West to promote the games. Kids would say they would come across the game randomly in their local game store, and those who picked up sometimes would turn into fans. It also didn't help, as mentioned, that the game had nothing to do with anime setup. So marketing, if there was any marketing, was hella confusing. Then the marketing of any merch was a write-off, since this was the mascot. No one sees an ad for the suezo mascot and thinks, I want to buy clothes of it or have plushies and leave it in their bedroom. Unless being a sociopath is how you rizz up the ladies. I mean, they did try to create Mocchi as a sellable character, but at this point, I don't blame Tecmo for not even trying to put it up against Pikachu and Agumon, who were soaring sales for Pokemon and Digimon at the time. Also, I do believe that some saw it as a show that was trying to ride the Pokemon hype train, which was super common at the time. I think because anime was so new in the Western world, any Japanese kids cartoon was immediately compared to Pokemon, which I think was unfair for Monster Rancher. So this made word of mouth for the Monster Rancher game and anime a lot more difficult, as it was pretty much written off as a Pokemon copy. It's unknown what Tecmo had in mind in growing the Monster Rancher brand. They clearly do care about the brand, as they keep developing more games, as shown from the latest Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher game, which was just released in 2022. It just seemed there was nothing to work with for the marketing department for Monster Rancher. It couldn't compete, and there was very little to market with. But always remember, just because something is popular doesn't mean it's the best, it just had the best marketing. But I still think Pokemon is actually a lot better than Monster Rancher, just overall, objectively, not even just because of the marketing. Today, the Monster Rancher franchise still has a dedicated fan base. The Reddit thread is still relatively active with a lot of die-hard fans who continue to play the games today. Hello Reddit thread, thank you for all your help, and share their passion of the games. It's a shame that the show couldn't continue today. The show was a whole lot of fun. I feel it was unfairly seen as a cheap knockoff to Pokemon and Digimon at the time. But it wasn't. I don't think it should be lost and forgotten in nostalgia. But unfortunately, unless Tecmo for some reason get inspired to release another anime or do a remake, I think, at least in the West, it is destined to be lost in memory. It is natural. There are many other shows from that time that are hardly talked about today. Although some are having an unexpected resurgence. Like, is it me or is it Card Captor Sakura getting a bit of more resurgence lately, with Uniqlo and Primark selling merch, plus a mobile video game which Alice has done her first impressions of for our channel, so check that out. But I think Tecmo are content to keep on satisfying their Japanese market and die-hard non-Japanese fans with game releases. It is what it is. It was a great anime story, and the world could easily be expanded to have new seasons and story arcs. But we're at the mercy of Tecmo to make any new stories. So if you do come across Monster Rancher for the first time in this video, do check out the anime. It's such an easy watch and a well put together story that does have some really good layers than the average Saturday morning kids cartoons at the time. And who knows, if you find a copy of the game, maybe pick it up and see what you think, but at least give the anime a shot. To all of us who did watch the anime or play the games, let us be grateful that we did come across it despite all the issues and lack of marketing, and got to experience a great Japanese pop culture. So, why do you think Monster Rancher couldn't raise in popularity today? Have you played the games or watched the anime? How did you find them? Leave a comment below to share your interest about Monster Rancher, or if you're interested now. And thanks for watching, and if I encourage you to at least think about subscribing, we'd be so grateful. It will really help us grow. See you guys in the next video.